After 4.5 years of having an iPhone, I finally decided to switch back to Android. Here's my experience. Up until about 4 years ago, I'd been using Android phones for most of my life. That was until I finally switched to an iPhone. My very first iPhone, the iPhone 12 mini. Now that phone was revolutionary for me. It changed the way that I saw iPhones and it changed the way that I used my mobile phone. The thing that really drew me to it in the first place was actually its small form factor, as well as the occasional perks that you get of having iOS. Around that same time, I delved into buying an iPad for the very first time for myself, as well as eventually buying myself a Mac Mini, which has led my journey into the Apple ecosystem. So it's safe to say that after a while, I was heavily invested into this ecosystem, into the walled garden that keeps so many of Apple's customers in their grasp for so long. So for reference, when I first started with iPhone, I started off with an iPhone 12 mini, and then eventually I moved to an iPhone 14 Pro. Both of those phones I have loved, but the biggest issue for me has been battery life. After just 2 years of use for each of them, 2.5 on the iPhone 14 Pro, I found that the battery life just deteriorates really quickly and the phone just doesn't perform as it should do after 2 years. Now, I could just get another iPhone, but the thing is, in my past experiences using Android, this was never an issue. And along with the fact that iPhones have just gotten really boring with the recent releases, I just thought now was the best time to try and see if I can, crawl out of this walled garden that has been created for us by Apple. So that's where the OnePlus 13 comes in. This is the phone that I've decided to go with as I try to escape the Apple ecosystem. Now, there are a few main things that kept me within Apple's ecosystem. The main thing has to be the convenience of the continuity that you have between all your devices. From wearing my AirPod Pros and switching between my phone and my Mac, that was such a great feature, as well as just being able to copy and paste text from my iPhone and have it come straight to my Mac without any sort of extra steps needed. Copy on one device and you can paste on another. It's as seamless as that. Along with that, there's a few other nice features such as AirDrop. You also have messaging, which translates to all your devices, as well as lastly having your Apple Photos and everything else just sync up very seamlessly. That being Apple Pages, Apple Notes. I have to be honest, since moving over to Apple and all of the iOS devices, I have just slowly started switching all of my software to Apple, which is probably not the best thing for me as a consumer. However, it's exactly what Apple wants and they make it so easy to do so. So trying to break free of this is probably going to be the biggest challenge here. And the last challenge is probably just getting used to Android again. Of course, I'm very familiar with it, I've used it before. However, having been on iOS for about 4.5 years, you do just get used to the way it looks and the way it operates, so it's interesting to see how that plays out when you move over to the other side. Having now had the OnePlus 13 for a few weeks now, I have to say, I'm loving it. I've now just been using the OnePlus 13 as my daily driver for about 3 or 4 weeks now, with the iPhone 14 Pro just on standby in case I need it for any tasks that I'm either unable to do or haven't logged into the new phone with yet. And after actually having had the phone for a few weeks now, I've noticed that I actually gravitate to using that iPhone less and less. Initially, the plan was to use it as a social media device, going to the iPhone just to be able to post social media things, whether it's photos or videos on my stories, and things like that. However, I found that actually I do that a lot less than I thought I would, and the OnePlus 13 serves perfectly fine for that. My only real issue is the fact that I can't use the iOS emojis on my Android phone without rooting it. But to be fair, it's not the biggest deal breaker. I either just have stopped using emojis in a lot of my stories, or there are a few workarounds where you can add them in. It's a bit long-winded, but it gets the job done. To be honest, I don't think emojis are a big enough reason for you not to switch phone. It seems like quite a childish debate, that. In terms of overall performance though, the OnePlus 13 has been fantastic. It feels quick, it feels snappy, the screen is big, it's bright, the battery life lasts ages. I've been able to do an entire day with this phone really, starting the day at about 5 in the morning and getting home at about 11 p.m. and the phone was only then on about 2% battery life, and that was because I'd been heavily using it throughout the day, with 2 long train journeys throughout that day as well, each being 2 hours and me being consistently on my phone in that time. So for me to be able to get back home and still have, just that slightest bit of juice in my phone was so nice, and not really having to worry about power too much compared to the iPhone previously, where I definitely wouldn't have been able to get through that day without having charged it at least once or twice throughout that day. I would have to say that battery life anxiety really is a thing of the past with this phone. It is just incredible. Another thing that I really love is that always on display. It is just quite nice to have. It's just being able to see the time at a glance without having to actually turn on your phone, see if any notifications has popped up. It has made me just stop picking up my phone as much to see what texts are incoming. Occasionally you'll still do it out of habit and wanting to see exactly what it was. However, it does at least give you a small indicator as to what's going on without having to pick it up. I know you have an always on display with your iPhone. However, I did find that I just didn't like the way that looked compared to the OnePlus, which is a completely black screen with just the bits of text lit up as you need it. Another big transition for me has actually been getting used to fingerprint unlocking my phone again. That's something that I haven't done in a while, as I'm used to Face ID, but honestly, not a big deal. It works just fine. Now, without getting into too much more depth as to everything within, switching from one phone to another, I would just say that initially it seems like a massive hurdle, but as you go along with the process and you start using it for a few weeks, I have found that it just gets easier and easier, and there's not really that much I miss from my iPhone. There's a few apps that no longer work. There's a few things that I've had to adjust. However, it's not that big of a deal. And in fact, one of the things that I was really hesitant about losing out on was AirDrop. And what OnePlus has done is they've devised this system where essentially you can AirDrop from your OnePlus phone to an iPhone or to your Mac or any other device, as long as you download their app. And what I found is, as long as I'm just transferring from myself on my devices to my phone or vice versa, it's actually really quick, it's really seamless, it's really easy, and it just works really well. So I don't even miss not having AirDrop. And if I really need to share something to someone else, then I can either send it through WhatsApp or another form, or if I really need to, I can send it through my phone to my Mac and then AirDrop it to them that way. So there are always workarounds. Yes, it's a little bit longer. Yes, there are a few things that I miss, like not having the ability to switch from my AirPods on one device to the other seamlessly. However, these are small minor inconveniences that in the grand scheme of things, I would easily trade for the ability to have a phone that actually lasts me several years. The battery life will work, it's consistent, it's quick, and it's very customizable. Now, one of the things I was also hesitant about when switching over from the iPhone was just the way the phone looks. However, as we all know, Android is extremely customizable. What I found was that I was actually able to make it look very similar to my iPhone by just downloading a icon pack, and to be honest, they look very similar, very indistinguishable, and so it really didn't feel like I'd switched phones at all, except for, the size and a few minor features that had to change. So overall, would I recommend switching from iPhone to Android, and will I be keeping my Android? First of all, let's start with, do I recommend switching? If you're thinking about switching and the only thing stopping you from doing so is a few minor things in the Apple ecosystem, I would say honestly, just get the Android. You will switch over and soon after you'll probably forget about those minor inconveniences. Yes, there are definitely things I miss about my iPhone, but they're not enough to make me switch back in the slightest. And I'm actually very happy with this phone. Going on to the second part of that, am I going to keep mine? Yes, I will be. I love the OnePlus 13. It's quick, it's fast, it's a high performance phone. It's got 512 gigs of storage, and that was the base model, right? That's crazy. I would not have anywhere near that storage on my iPhone unless I paid a lot more money. So value for money wise as well is really affordable in comparison, while outperforming it in most metrics. So if you're stuck in Apple's ecosystem and you're looking for a change, just try something new. There are loads of options out there, and it is possible to escape the ecosystem. I'm Amar Zafar, and I will see you in the next video.